The Atlanta Story is a podcast highlighting Atlanta's most interesting creators, entrepreneurs, and builders. If you are curious, self-starting, and creative, this is the podcast for you. I'm Jon Birdsong with Atlanta Ventures, and in today's episode, we have Tharon Johnson, CEO of Paramount Consulting Group. Tharon is a former campaign manager turned political strategist. He's led campaigns for Congressman John Lewis, Mayor Kasim Reed, and many more. We talk all things Atlanta, how he builds his business, and what it takes to make an impact in the city today. We hope you enjoy the show and subscribe to the Atlanta Story. Welcome. We have Tharon Johnson here, recording live in the Atlanta Ventures podcast studio right in the heart of Buckhead at the Atlanta Tech Village. Tharon, welcome.
It's good to be here, man.
To the Atlanta Story.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. I think it's so important to really have opportunities for people to share their stories. And so I really want to thank you all for doing this.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time. We know it's important, especially this year with all of the exciting political narratives that are taking place. And, you know, Tharon, you've been a staple in the city of Atlanta for years. You're on CNN, MSNBC, WABE, Georgia Gang. So you're not a stranger to the lights and cameras. And so we appreciate your time.
Thank you. And when you put it that way, wow, I mean, it's like I'm doing a whole lot. I guess folks are not tired of hearing from me. So well, I got something to say. Well,
let's dive right in. August 2009, you were the campaign manager of then State Senator Kasim Reed. Mm-hmm. Y'all were polling at 3% with 3 months left to the general election. What decisions and strategies did y'all implement to win the election?
That campaign was probably the hardest campaign I had to run because I knew how important this race was, not only to then State Senator Kasim Reed, but how important it was to the city of Atlanta. John, you may remember that's when you and I first met, and it was a crowded field at that time of 4 candidates. And I got to give credit first to Mayor Kasim Reed, who was State Senator Kasim Reed at the time, because even though I had to make some very difficult decisions as far as personnel, we made some very difficult decisions as far as messaging. And you're
29 or 30 as the campaign manager?
Yeah, 30 at the time. And you can imagine that a 30-year-old is sort of got the weight of the world on his shoulder as far as the trajectory of the city of Atlanta, maintaining the legacy that Mayor Maynard Jackson started, where Mayor Andrew Young sort of sustained it, and Mayor Bill Campbell and Mayor Franklin has sort of maintained this tremendous legacy of African-American leadership in the city of Atlanta. And so the thing that I thought was so important is that Kasim gave me an opportunity like he was afforded when he was 30, 31, when he ran Mayor Franklin's campaign in 2001. And so once I knew that I had a leader like him who was waking up every single morning, working as hard as he could possibly work, he showed me a lot of deference. And so the first thing we had to do is that we had to really dig deep within our campaign, and we had to really look at the people who were working for us and really figure out if we were fully maximizing their potential.
And so this was August 1st. You're walking into the campaign office, which the headquarters was West End?
Yeah, we had a headquarters in West End, near the West End Mall. Very accessible. It was an old Ace Hardware building.
Yep.
I remember it vividly, where we had desks set up, and the only person who actually had an office was Kasim and I, and we actually share that office. But we wanted to make people feel welcome, and we wanted the staff to not really sort of be siloed off in different offices. We wanted it to be a collective spirit in the room when we were running the campaign.
So August 1st, polling at 3%, you and then State Senator Reed surveyed the team at that moment and made sure everyone was a believer, or what was the step one to win the election?
Well, I remember when we got the poll numbers, Kasim and I were in the car together. And back then, John, we had BlackBerries. And so, believe it or not, people don't really carry many of those these days. But I remember getting the poll around the same time he did on our devices. And I remember handing him my phone, and he read the poll, and it was just a period of silence. And one thing, I got to give him credit, is he made a joke and he said, well, all we can do is go up from here, meaning that we were in last place and only 3% of the people who were polled actually believed that we could win. So we analyzed what we had, and then we knew that we had to raise money at a faster pace, because the traditional campaign plan was to raise as much money as you possibly could, store it in sort of your bank account, don't spend a lot, and then spend it all at the end, and try to really make sure that you got a message that's resonating with the people of Atlanta. You got a Get Out the Vote campaign where you're turning out voters that you've ID'd. Kasim and I made a decision that was led by his experience in the race, that we knew we had to immediately go up with a radio ad from Ambassador Andrew Young on African American radio, because what we saw is that you had a white candidate who then was Mary Norwood, and she was a city councilwoman who was getting more support in the African American community than us, than Jesse Spikes, and also Lisa Borders combined.
Yep.
And so what we realized, though, is that when we looked at the undecided numbers, we still had a lot of African American women over the age of 45 who had not declared a candidate at the time. And the one occurring issue that they all were concerned about was the issue of crime and public safety. And you may remember, John, at that time, you had gang violence sort of in front and center of some of the root of some of the crime problems we were having. People were experiencing smash and grabs. Mm-hmm. Folks' doors were getting kicked in. I mean, people really didn't feel safe to be in their homes. And so what we did...
And was that a guess for the 45 and older women? Was that a guess of that was their biggest?
Yeah, when we asked them questions, what issue is most important to you right now? We asked them if it was healthcare, was it transportation, was it potholes, was it your water infrastructure? And when we asked them about crime and public safety, we asked them about reopening the recreation centers. Kasim coined this phrase, which was called Centers of Hope. I believe he had visited another city, and they had what they call Centers of Hope. So we rebranded the recreation centers. And what we did masterfully was made a direct correlation to, if you give young people in the city of Atlanta an opportunity to go to these recreation centers that we want to turn into centers of hope, it is going to drastically decrease the number of people who are committing crimes, particularly youth crimes, in the city. And so once we made that correlation and we connected the two, we targeted the African-American women, particularly over the age of 45, that said that public safety in the city was their number one issue. And so you may remember all we talked about was, number one, keeping Atlanta safe, and number two, making sure that we reopen the recreation centers that had been closed because of budget cuts. Yep. And we talked a lot about Centers of Hope. And then we put out a field team that, quite frankly, you may even, you probably forgot about this, but back in 2009, the hot thing was to have a Palm Pilot. And so we had people who either had a choice to have actual paper with pen, and checking off, if I go to Jon Birdsong's house, he told me that he's going to vote for Kasim Reed. So we immediately identified you as a Reed voter. But once we figured out how to use the once we figured out how to use the Palm Pilots, is when we were able to have speed to market, so to speak, meaning we could have a Palm Pilot download the data overnight. So when we have out the walk sheets the next day, we were able to print them out in real time, real data. It took a lot of manpower to have folks in the campaign office during the wee hours of the night calculating this data. So anyway, make a long story short, we did three things. One, we the mayor definitely showed a lot of leadership, while he was a candidate at the time, saying, hey, we got to do something differently. 2, we beefed up our resources as far as fundraising. And then 3.
How did you guys make that pitch? I mean, here's a candidate that's polling at 3%.
To this day, John, I think that's a question that Kasim Reed, if he was to share that with people, we should coin it and we should we should patent it. Yeah. Because what I would watch, John, what was so interesting is that he would sit at the table, very similar to the table we're at today, and he would get on the phone and he would be so specific about how he was going to win the race. And you got to think about it. Public polling is something that people believe in. We had several TV stations in the city of Atlanta that were doing their own polling. And what we knew, John, is that their polling wasn't matching our internal polls. So when we got to like August, September, October, we saw that Kasim's numbers were
15%.
Yeah, 15, 19. You may remember we put out a memo saying that we were statistically tied for second place with Lisa Borders. But we would see all this internal polling that showed our trajectory towards victory or getting to runoff was increasing. But then a public poll comes out and it totally was different than what we were saying to people and what we were saying internally. And so Kasim did a masterful job of really just dealing with people who were questioning his intellect and his belief because they're like, dude, I just saw a poll that has you at 6%, 7%, and you're telling me you're going to make it to a runoff and win this election. And so one of the things that he did very well is that he was very, very adamant that he wanted to call as many people as he possibly could that will listen and told them that we were going to win the race. And so once we went up with the radio ad from Ambassador Young, which
was a huge endorsement.
Huge endorsement. I mean, at that time, and still now, I mean, Ambassador Andrew Young is probably, no matter who you put him on a poll questionnaire with, he's always one of the top 3. I mean, he's up there with Maynard Jackson, Congressman John Lewis, Barack Obama, Mayor Kasim Lance Bottoms. I mean, he's the person that you want to endorse you. Reverend Lowry was a high name at the time. We later got his endorsement. And so what Ambassador Young's commercial on radio did, John, is that it reminded people that Kasim was of the Atlanta community. And as an African-American male, he was very successful in being a lawyer, went to Howard undergrad, went to Howard Law School. I mean, he legitimized Kasim's candidacy on Black radio. And remember, with radio ads, you're really able to, in a repetitive manner, tell a story about someone. And so when we went up really early with this radio ad, some of the people who have won races in Atlanta, they said, man, traditionally you don't do that. And then you may remember we sent out mail pieces. I think we mailed probably 4 or 5 mail pieces citywide. And there was one mail piece I remember where Kasim was actually holding a chain, and it was a chain that was connected to a fence. And behind it was a closed, I can't remember if it was a closed recreation center, a closed building, but basically it was something along the lines of, when I become mayor, I'm going to unlock these chains. And we really talked about his work in the state legislature. And if he was elected mayor, he'll be able to work with the state to make sure that the partnership between the city and the state maintained itself. We talked a lot about transit, but more importantly, we talked about Centers of Hope, and we talked about hiring 2,000 police officers and really nailed down on our messaging as far as public safety.
So what I'm hearing is got everyone to believe on the campaign. If they weren't, then they were out. Leveraged the endorsement from Ambassador Young to raise money. And then the third was messaging via door-to-door canvassing and targeted mail pieces. Yeah,
I mean, our field team did a phenomenal job of recruiting volunteers. We had a confluence of paid staff and volunteers. And on a campaign, John, I look at it now is, back then, you could really dictate the momentum of your campaign based on your volunteerism. If a lot of folks were wanting to come back to volunteer, so that means that you were not only acquiring them, but you were retaining this enthusiasm.
Is that a feel thing, or is that a data?
Field. Well, it's a data thing, but also, when I started seeing volunteers who were coming back, day and day and have been there for 3 weeks and 4 weeks, that mean that they really believed in the campaign. And you got to remember, this was sort of door-to-door tactics that we were using, that really they were our foot soldiers. They were our posters, because they would come back and tell us what folks were saying at the doors. And what we found out is that a lot of people, even though Kasim was a state senator, former state rep, had worked on Shirley Franklin's first campaign as campaign manager, had worked at 2 international law firms, had been in the media. A lot of people didn't know who he was. And so his name identification was very low. And so I can't tell you how important it was for us to invest into a field operation. And it was really a scientific, data-driven field operation that at that time no one had really been able to implement in the city of Atlanta.
Interesting. Well, I know we could talk about the 2009 mayoral election for many hours, but I want to evolve to the next 10 years, and also bring it back. So I guess about a year ago, Paramount Consulting Group, which is the firm you run today, had its 2-year anniversary. It was about a year ago, right? March.
Correct. Yeah.
And you were able to fill that room with Ambassador Young, the governor, the mayor, and Speaker Ralston, the CEO of DeKalb, Michael Thurman. Where did you learn your style of consensus building, particularly in today's world where consensus building is not how many leaders communicate?
So, I'll be brief. I think it all started with my mom. So you got to remember, I grew up in Athens, Georgia. I was born in Atlanta, Grady baby. We lived for about a year near Greenbrier Mall off Campbellton Road. But from 2 years old on, from 2 to 18, I grew up in Athens. And Athens is a college town, go Dogs, with the University of Georgia there. But it's a city that is very tolerable when it comes to issues of race. And let me just be more specific, because this podcast is about giving people an opportunity to really tell the story and tell the truth. White people in Athens, most of them academics, because a lot of them worked in the university system of Georgia, and the hospital was a big employer there. But a lot of the white people, particularly my white friends, my white counterparts, they made it very, very easy for a young African-American kid like myself, who was raised by a single mom, who didn't finish high school, to always make me feel comfortable in who I was and who I am. And, back then in high school, I played football. And my head coach, Billy Henderson, who passed away a couple years ago, always said, doesn't matter the color of your skin. At the end of the day, we all bleed red and gold when we're in this football field. And so the common bond between me and some of my white male friends was football. So fast forward, when I get to Atlanta and I go to a historically black college and university like Clark Atlanta University, I had never been around that many African-American students before at one time, because my high school was probably 75 to 80% white. And so fast forward to going through that experience, which I think, really helped me understand the Atlanta culture. That was in 1996. I go and I work for, Mayor Bill Campbell. But here's the truth. I've learned that because of my mom, who is a person who believes in giving everyone a fair shot to prove themselves, never ever think anything racist or to discriminate on anyone because of their gender, because of the color of their skin, or their sexual orientation. I said to myself, all right, so how am I going to separate myself with my new firm? Because you got to remember, John, since 2003, the Republican lobbying firms, all you had to do is be a Republican. You didn't have to have relationships with the mayor of Atlanta or the CEO of DeKalb County or the chairman of Fulton County. And then I saw in the last 5 years where these Republican law firms had started figuring out, okay, it may not be a bad idea because I'm making all my money at the state, because you got to remember, Republicans in this state have been in charge since 2003.
Right.
And now they hold every single constitutional office.
And Paramount's not just Democrat or Republican.
Correct. So when I launched it in May of 2017, I left Greenberg Traurig. Ernest Greer, who was the president there, gave me a tremendous opportunity. And I said, I'm not going to be labeled as a black Democratic firm. I refused to. I said, why should I limit myself to just being a Black Democratic firm? And what I said to my team is, fast forward 2 years later, I said, why don't we do an event? Let's do it at Ansley Golf Club. Mm-hmm. As you know, I'm one of probably, less than 10% minority members at the club. And it's not no offense to Ansley. I think that they're definitely the most diverse golf club in the city of Atlanta, probably in the state of Georgia. But I said, I don't want to do it on the south side of town. I don't want to do it in Buckhead. Let's do it in the heart of Midtown. Let's do it at a club where everyone's going to feel welcome. And more importantly, I said, you know what? There's something that's missing right now in the state of Georgia. There's really not a true bipartisan firm that is beyond what they put on paper. Let's see if you can prove it. So I had this crazy idea. I called Governor Kemp. And Governor Kemp and I have known each other for over 20 years because he's from Athens. Yep. So I met him before he was a state senator. When he was a state senator, we did some work together. And then when he was a Secretary of State, he was always accessible to me. I want to make it clear, I'm a Democrat. I voted for Stacey Abrams. The governor knows that. But he won. He's a governor. So I called him. I said, Governor Kemp, I said, I want to do an event to not only to celebrate 2 years of me operating a very, I believe, good firm that's doing good work for our clients. But I want to use my 2-year anniversary event to really bring the state together. And you got to remember, John, this is right around the time where the heartbeat bill, which many people had issues with. Some people thought it was the right thing to do if you were pro-life. But I said, I want to bring you and the Lieutenant Governor and Speaker Ralston to an event with the Mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottom, CEO Michael Thurman, Ambassador Andrew Young, Atlanta City Council, Atlanta Public Schools, also COP Chairman Mike Boyce. And so immediately the governor said yes, because why? He knows, all right, this is my homeboy from Athens. Yep. And the governor, based on his governing style, legacy with them. Wanted to be there. But the guy who also jumped and said, I definitely want to be a part of it was Speaker David Ralston, who's my friend. And so Speaker Ralston, North Georgia. Blue Ridge, Georgia. Is a Republican. I'm a Democrat, but we found some ways to work together. And so when I went to the mayor about it, and those who know me, Mayor Bottoms and I have a really good relationship. She said, absolutely, no problem. And so I remember leading up to the event about 2 days before, the governor called me and he said, do you still want me to come? And the reason he asked me that question is because the heartbeat bill had passed and Georgia was on the national scene as far as, what would happen. The film industry is going to pull out. You had people on the Democratic side really taking shots at the governor. And I told the governor, I said, look, you committed to this event over a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago. It would be disloyal of me to cancel an event or uninvite you because of what you did legislatively, what you thought was right. So when I put those flyers out on the internet, and you remember I emailed everybody, I know you got a bunch of emails, and I intentionally showed all of these pictures together, people, quite frankly, wanted to come to see if I was going to pull this off. Yeah. And they wanted to see, will the governor show up? The reason Lieutenant Governor didn't show up is because he was out of town. The mayor was there. The CEO was there. We had probably about 5 or 6 council members there. We had the chair of the Atlanta School Board, Jason Estevez. And so it was a wild. So you were there. Wild afternoon. So the clients saw, wow, a guy who we're paying money to really be able to work in a bipartisan manner to achieve our objectives can really reach across the aisle and invite Republicans and Democrats, and all of them show up. It's almost a legacy of the Atlanta way. Well, and that's what I'm getting to, because one of the things that Ambassador Andrew Young said was, there were times where the mayor of Atlanta and the governor did not get along. But boy, when they can communicate, when they can find common ground to work together, the citizens of Georgia, we all benefit. And so it was the Atlanta way. I mean, you had everyone in one room talking to each other. And, we left our partisanship at the door. So believe it or not, year 3? Well, here's the thing, though, John. Believe it or not, and I'll share with you, because, you and I always keep it real with each other. I probably got a majority of people who were very excited for me and praised me for doing the event. But believe it or not, I got a lot of pushback from some of my Democratic friends. And what I had to remind them is, and we'll get into this in a little bit, there's no one in this state that has elected more Democrats than me. There's no one in this state that's not elected that goes on television or radio every single day to promote the Democratic agenda. Mm-hmm. But don't criticized me because I did an event to bring Georgia together at a very, very pivotal time where we were at crossroads with each other. The city and the state was very divided. The airport was at the top of the agenda, whether or not the state was going to take it over. But year 3, no more parties. We may do something in the 5th year. But it was a great event, and it was something that I think that I will go down in history, as Ambassador Young said, and also Greg Bluestein from the AJC said that the only person in the state of Georgia that could have pulled that off was Tharon Johnson.
Yeah. And we're going to take a quick break here and share that this podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business out of Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com. You brought up a point, and this was last week or two on the Georgia gang, and you said the middle is wide open right now, right? And your thesis with Paramount Consulting is, you're working with left, right, and you're living that thesis. Do you think you're 5-8 years ahead of how the political broader spectrum at the national level will move back towards? Because, right now you read anything and it's hard left, hard right, and everyone is just going that way. But, for someone like you to say the middle is wide open right now, what do you mean by that from a national level?
Yeah, so you're a student of the game. You've studied politics, and you're right. You remember this, John. Back in the early 2000s, we had what we called in Congress the Blue Dog Democrats. These were people who represented somewhat moderate to conservative or moderate to liberal districts, but they were a caucus of folks in Washington that found a third way solution. Former President Clinton coined that phrase. He worked with a lot of people to get things done and figure out a third way. And so what's happened in our country, and I think it really started in 2012. I saw it when I was on the re-election campaign for President Barack Obama. I saw it in Florida. We lost North Carolina. And it was really the social issues. And it was not so much that the issues were there and people were voting on them, but both parties were basically retreating to their corners about them. And there was just no common sense conversations about them. And so why I'm so adamant about that Democrats, if we want to win again in the South, particularly, and in Georgia, then we got to figure out a way to bring people back to the Democratic Party who really, quite frankly, left in 2002 in Georgia. And it was based on teacher pay. It was based on infrastructure and transit ideas.
Back in 2002.
Correct. And so a lot of these white Democrats, particularly men, felt like the Republican Party represented their financial interests. And so what I'm saying now, where you really have tribalism on both sides, don't get me wrong, my party, I cringe sometimes when I see how far left we're going. And then I don't need to tell you on the right side of Republicans where you have a president who I think wakes up every single day and figures out how controversial he can be on Twitter, but who has done some good things for the economy. I want to be fair. It's basically making both parties retreat to their corners and not necessarily focusing on issues that I think that middle America will pay attention to. Because the truth of the matter is, John, you can disagree or agree with people on the issues, but if you really take a deeper dive on why people disagree on issues, it all kind of comes down to how you're going to pay for it. So you look at healthcare. At the center of the debate of healthcare, and I don't believe Republicans wake up every morning and say, hey, I want to take away people's healthcare. Mm-hmm. I think what the argument is how you're going to pay for it. Education is the center of how you're going to pay for it. Are you taking money out of public schools? I mean, I can go on and on and on about infrastructure, things, how you're going to pay for it. So I'm alone right now in 2020 of really making sure that I'm speaking loud and clear about asking Democrats to be more moderate. But I predict in the next 4 years that you'll see more and more people look back to what I said in 2020. And once Democrats really put winning at the top of the agenda and again, and stop trying to redefine rock bottom when it comes to our ability to win, then I think you'll see us starting to pick up more seats all across the South.
Do you think there's any correlation to the fragmentation of message? 2012. So, Twitter kind of came on the scene 2008, 9, 10. 2012, Facebook goes public. Like it's at its height, right? And so now you have all of this fragmented messaging because when people are getting millions of followers on Instagram 3 years later, 2015, and how has that affected getting out the political message for any agenda?
Yeah, we live in a 24-hour media cycle now, and I want to start with the media because I think they play a pivotal role in how social media amplifies what the media can say or do. And so if you're a candidate now running for office, you've got to have a team around you to not only be on the offense, but you got to be on the defense. John, all it takes is for one person to tweet something about you, whether it's true or not. If it picks up, some steam and it starts to get amplified and retweeted or reposted on Facebook or shared, you've got to pay attention to it. And so nowadays, folks cannot necessarily have a lot of experience in their field, but if they have an opinion and they use their First Amendment right, they can put it on social media. Oh, yeah. And it's forced people who are running for office to look at how they get their message out differently. Also, it's many people feel that it's a more cost-effective way to reach the masses of voters or the masses of people that you want to advocate for your issue that you're advocating for. And so I believe that it's because we live in this sort of 24-hour media cycle where the media really controls so much of the narrative, that social media has a positive role to play. But I am a little concerned that people misuse it to really spread hate, spread division, and quite frankly, we also got to make sure that we don't lose the true meaning of retail politics, which means there's nothing wrong with sitting in a room and having a face-to-face conversation with someone and not arguing with them on a Twitter thread.
Yep. I want to bring it back to an iconic Atlantan, an iconic Georgian, one that you are also the campaign manager of, and that is Congressman John Lewis. You have a very high opinion of Congressman Lewis, and he's an icon to the city of Atlanta. You know him well, obviously, from being the campaign manager. What is it about Congressman Lewis that, from a leadership perspective, from a values perspective, that really builds that loyalty, 15 years later?
Congressman Lewis is my hero, and I'm actually kind of even getting a little emotional just having this conversation with you about him because he means so much to me and millions of people all around the world. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of people. If I could say one word that describes Congressman Lewis and his political leadership, that word would be integrity. If you really look at how someone who's been in politics since 1986, as long as he has, and to be there that long as a congressman, and even before he became a member of Congress, and he served on Atlanta City Council, got elected in the late 70s. So for you to be in politics that long and to be involved in no scandals, no ethics stuff, to wake up every single morning figuring out how you can serve the people of America, particularly the people of the 5th District, that's what's missing today in politics. I had a chance to talk to Congressman Lewis a lot during the campaign in 2008 when he gave me an opportunity. I tell you this, John, the hardest decision I had to make, and not to focus this podcast segment all on Kasim, but many people forget I actually had to leave Congressman Lewis's office to go work for Kasim. And it was a very tough decision because I was working for someone who I admire so much and who means so much to me. So, when they say that John Lewis is the conscience of the Congress, it is so true. When you walk through the streets of Washington, D.C. with Congressman Lewis, it's like he's a Beatle. People are coming up taking pictures. Try going to the grocery store on Cascade Road at Kroger or the Publix with him, it's a 3-hour excursion because people love him so much. And so he's not only my hero, he's my political idol. And I think that, he has done a phenomenal job of leading this district. And more importantly, I think that if we could have more people like Congressman John Lewis in politics today, you would see less self-servant tribalism. You would see more public service from people who really want to do things that he has done for us all throughout the equal rights campaign, civil rights campaign. We got to remember, this is a young man who really started SNCC and was all about making sure that the civil rights movement didn't leave out young students all across the country. So he's very special to me. And look, I think that he is going to be the congressman for a very long time in this district. And I think he deserves the right to serve as long as he wants to serve as our congressman.
Yep.
And no one and nobody should ever utter any words about him passing the torch or that he should, not serve anymore. And I would tell those people who say that to really go and, as Congressman would say, take a walk in his shoes and realize what he's endured all his life to give us an opportunity to live in this free country.
Wonderful. I want to transition a little bit more to the future now, and the future of Atlanta from a demographics perspective. What does that do for housing? What does that do for the upcoming mayoral election, which is next year, and the trends you're seeing in the city of Atlanta right now? And let's start with that.
Yeah, I think the big thing that comes to mind are really a few things. A few things come to mind. So I'm really happy that Mayor Bottoms is focusing on affordable housing, because we know that the city of Atlanta is just growing at a rapid pace.
What is it, 15,000, 20,000 people per month, or
correct?
If not more?
And people want to live here for a lot of different reasons. And so what the mayor is focusing on is making sure that folks who want to live in the city of Atlanta, who want their kids to go to school here, people who want to work in the city, who want to create a legacy in the city, that they can afford to live in the city. And so I have the pleasure of being up close and personal to it. I serve on the Atlanta Beltline Partnership Board, and I know that affordable housing, affordability is a big thing that they're focusing on. And when you have a lot of philanthropic leaders like Arthur Blank and the Woodruff Foundation and so many other organizations that continue to give back to the city of Atlanta to really help with affordability. If you look at what Chick-fil-A is doing and others, and AT&T with the West Side.
Yeah.
That's amazing. The second thing is we've got to really have some tough conversations about our transit systems. I'm a huge supporter of MARTA. And I think that when you look at some of our counties who refuse to expand MARTA to their counties based on whatever issues, I think some of them are deeply rooted in race. We can't continue to drive our cars everywhere. And so, and I think that, we are getting to a point where the traffic is just so bad in Atlanta, where our federal, state, and local leaders have got to come together. But let's deal with the elephant in the room, which is where I know you want to go with this. And that is, you see more and more white citizens moving back to the city of Atlanta. And so conventional wisdom would say that based on these, white citizens who have moved to the suburbs for whatever reason, or have moved to different counties because of whatever reason, they're coming back to Atlanta. The number of registered white voters are increasing.
Right.
But what gives me optimism, and I know a little something about elected mayors, is mayors of Atlanta, they don't just get elected because of black supporters or black voters. There are a huge number of white and Hispanic and Asian Atlantans who support candidates not based on their party affiliation, but based on their ability to lead the city. So there's a coalition that really, quite frankly, started when Sam Massell ran for mayor. But what Maynard Jackson was able to do was to beef up the African-American number. But he always maintained some of his neighborhoods, some of the folks that had different issues that were very important to them, and they wanted to see the mayor embody. And so, yes, the city of Atlanta is getting whiter. Yes, the city of Atlanta is getting younger. And we have so many transient people here, people
Right.
who don't understand the Atlanta story.
They don't vote.
And they don't vote, and they don't understand the Atlanta way. And so that's why what you guys are doing here by telling the story, that's why I want to just be so, raw with it. Meaning that, I'm one of these political guys who say, oh, when I look at the numbers, golly, look at those condos that are being built in Midtown and West Midtown. Now people are kind of making their way to Brookhaven, but they're kind of easing back into Buckhead, right? But I believe that this mayor sees the same trends as well. And I think that she is making a lot of policy decisions that will appeal to a lot of these transient citizens of Atlanta, and also the people who are moving from the burbs back into Atlanta. And so I do believe that once Mayor Bottoms is reelected, the person who will come after her, he or she, will probably have to figure out a way to sort of reboot and renew that coalition of people that are getting younger, but also making sure that they understand what are the different issues that can move them.
And did Kathy Woolard personify that coalition in the last?
Kathy Woolard did something that Mary Norwood did. You got to remember, Mary Norwood, city councilwoman at the time, burst onto the scenes, and we were like, oh my God, this woman has really spent 8 years as a council person going to the south side of Atlanta, east side, north side, west side. What Kathy Woolard was able to do, and she's my new permanent colleague on the Georgia Gang, so a little plug for the Georgia Gang, Fox 5, 8:30 a.m., is Kathy being an openly gay candidate, being one of, I think, the first openly gay city council presidents, not only in Georgia, but I think in the United States, ran unsuccessful for Congress in 1992, but came back and became city council president. She was able to really build this coalition of people, particularly on the east side, where, we hadn't seen turnout the way that we saw in 2017. And so Kathy showed us that you can focus on neighborhoods, and you also can work a certain sector of Atlanta that can really be ignited with a message that she gave. So Kathy showed everyone who's thinking about running for mayor that you got to really have a base of support. And now it's no longer just the south and north side. The east side got something to say as well.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Well, let's talk about the state of Georgia, the next 2 years to 5 years. What are some of the big trends that you see that are important to the state, knowing that the city of Atlanta is a huge economic driver for the state, but also the back and forth between city and state and all of that's happening today?
I'm very I feel good about where we are as far as the city and the state relationship. I think that Governor Brian Kemp and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms have found some common ground for them to work together. Once we get
Deal and Mayor Kasim, Governor Deal and Mayor Kasim, they worked well together.
They did, but it wasn't always peaches and cream. There were some times where they disagreed on how we treat our refugee community. You may remember. There were some times very early on where, quite frankly, the airport was at the center of the discussion. The difference is that you didn't have an ongoing federal corruption investigation going on at the time where Kasim took office. Mayor Bottom comes into office in 2018, and she immediately has to go into cleaning up city government because of all the things that were coming out. And so I think that once we get past this, I believe, reckless, unnecessary exploration of whether or not the state should actually control the world's busiest and most efficient airport. Once I think we get past that, I think the city and the state relationship would be fine. I am worried about some of the wage stagnation and some of the poverty issues that we have in our state. I'm worried about healthcare. I'm particularly rural healthcare. There are people that have to drive more than 30 miles just to get to a hospital. I'm extremely worried about transit, as I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. I think that we have got to figure out a way to get out of our cars and create more micromobility. We need more transit solutions to this city and the state. And I think the other thing is that we got to do something with this public safety issue that we have in our states, not just in the city of Atlanta. I'm not going to follow the Republican talking points and just blame it on gang violence. There is gang violence in this state, but there's a difference between gang violence and youth crime. And there's a lot of people who I believe are committing crimes that are youth because we haven't given them another way. We haven't, given the resources to them early on in elementary school, middle school, when we started to see them developing some of these trends that result into criminal behavior. We haven't focused enough on that. But the other thing is that the rural vote is going to be so important because Stacey Abrams came this close to being the first African-American female governor in the United States of America. And so she dominated the metro area, which is upwards to 7 million plus people. But you notice, John, once you get outside 285 or you get outside of some of our metropolitan counties, this Georgia. And Georgia is a whole different world compared to Atlanta. And so I do think that, you'll start seeing more and more people get elected as Democrats in this state. You look at what Lucy McBath was able to do in Congressional District 6, a woman who ran a very, very good campaign against an incumbent Republican congresswoman at the time with Karen Handel. But I do think that the Republicans have an issue to deal with, too, because we know that there's a lot of disaffected, college-educated, suburban white women who voted for President Trump in 2016 who probably still say that they're Republicans, but they don't really like the way that the president is governing. But here's what we can't do as Democrats. Back to my message about the middle. We can't be so far left with our messaging. We can't just throw culture change into some of these voters who we want to come back to the Democratic Party. We've got to govern and campaign from the middle to not, turn them off and give them an opportunity to really choose more Democratic candidates. And so I think you're going to see more and more Democrats trying to move to the middle. And definitely you've seen some Republicans do both. They move to the right, they move to the middle. But, you just look at the selection of Kelly Loeffler. I think the governor made an attempt to try to put a millionaire woman, particularly white woman, up to appeal to some of these disaffected, college-educated Republican women. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. And we always like to end on a two-part question, which is why Atlanta and what has the city provided you?
Atlanta is the one place where I feel no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, no matter you grew up low class, middle class, high class, if you have a dream and you're willing to work at it and you're willing to surround yourself with good people who want to mentor you, you can do anything you want to in Atlanta. Atlanta is a place where I believe that Black culture is not only accepted, it's celebrated.
Yep.
If you look at the amount of people here who are African American, who are just dominating their fields, there's no place like Atlanta. And if you look at some of our heritage, particularly our civil rights movement, and how white America and Black America and Asian America and Hispanic America, but particularly Atlantans, not only embrace that through their rhetoric, but they live it every single day. Mm. And then the other thing is, too, Atlanta has been so good to me because when I'm in Atlanta, I don't experience some of the racial things that some of my other friends experience in other states. This is the one place where you can be a Black man and have a crazy dream that you're going to be able to run one of the top government affairs firms in the state. And how dare you, bring Republicans and Democrats together and don't allow yourself to be pigeonholed by your colleagues, your peers, to just being a person that can only talk to people who look and sound like me. And so Atlanta is a world-class city, and we have startup companies like the work that you guys are doing in the tech space. If you look at the smart cities, the stuff that we're doing around here, and then the Fortune 500 companies in the business community who just don't make millions and millions of dollars, they actually give back to things like affordable housing, making sure that we revitalize places in Atlanta. And so, again, I just think that Atlanta is unparalleled when it comes to the ability to give entrepreneurs an opportunity to be whoever they want to be.
Tharon, thank you so much for being part of the Atlanta story.
I appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. It was co-produced by JC Lucas and Jon Birdsong. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business in Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com and the companies we work with who've done it before. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it at your next coffee meeting or dinner greeting, rate it, and write a benevolent, eloquent review.